Months after two men broke the seal on a tomb that had sat undisturbed for 3,000 years, the man who funded the dig was dead in a Cairo hotel room. By the next morning, newspapers on 3 continents were running the exact same word: curse.
It would not be the last time.
Long before Tutankhamun, and long after him, disaster after disaster across completely unconnected cultures was explained away the exact same way. Blamed on a hex, a hidden trap, an angry god. Anything except the thing that actually killed the people involved. Today, 10 of history's most famous curses are on the table. We're pulling them apart with the tools of modern forensic science, epidemiology, volcanology, and plain statistics to see what is left standing once the ghost story gets subtracted. Stay to the end, because the pattern connecting all 10 cases says less about ancient curses than it does about the wiring inside your own skull.
The Curse of Tutankhamun. Start with the case that gave the word curse its modern reputation. In November 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter and his financial backer, Lord Carnarvon, opened King Tutankhamun's tomb. 5 months later, Carnarvon was dead. The official story was embarrassingly mundane. He cut open a mosquito bite while shaving, it turned septic, and the infection developed into fatal pneumonia. But newspapers were not interested in the mundane. Rival papers, desperate for an exclusive angle, spread stories that all the lights in Cairo went dark the moment he died, and that his dog dropped dead in England. Neither claim holds up. Cairo's power grid failed constantly in 1923, and the dog actually died hours later.
Modern science points to a real, non-supernatural culprit: Aspergillus flavus. Sealed tombs can become breeding grounds for toxic fungi, and Carnarvon, permanently frail from a previous car accident, was highly vulnerable. Furthermore, in 2002, an epidemiologist tested the curse statistically. He compared the lifespans of the 25 Westerners who entered the tomb against 19 who were in Egypt but never went inside. The result? No meaningful difference in life expectancy. Howard Carter himself lived another 17 years. The curse was nothing more than a dramatic coincidence fueled by a media war.
2. The Doom of Pompeii. Pompeii was not struck down by an angry force. It was ambushed by one it never saw coming. By the year 79, its residents had no idea Mount Vesuvius was a volcano. When the eruption finally came, it unfolded in 2 deadly phases. First, a rain of pumice and ash. Then, the real killer. 6 separate pyroclastic surges, fast-moving clouds of superheated gas and rock.
For decades, scientists assumed the victims slowly suffocated, choking on ash while curling into defensive postures. Modern forensics completely overturned this. Bone analysis reveals exposure to temperatures between 250 and 600 degrees Celsius. The victims died almost instantly from thermal shock. That famous pugilistic pose seen in the plaster casts is not evidence of suffering or self-defense. It is a post-mortem effect called a cadaveric spasm, where extreme heat involuntarily contracts muscle fibers, freezing the body instantly. Pompeii was not cursed, it was just sitting on a geological time bomb.
The Hope Diamond. Swap a tomb for a gemstone, and the story shifts from mold spores to marketing. The famous French blue diamond was stolen during the French Revolution. Because King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were executed shortly after, the diamond was retroactively blamed for their downfall, as if a piece of carbon orchestrated a revolution built on famine and debt. Decades later, the diamond was recut and landed in the hands of jeweler Pierre Cartier to sell it to a wealthy socialite named Evelyn Walsh McLean, who loved objects with dark reputations.
Cartier largely invented the diamond's cursed mythology. It worked perfectly. Our obsession with cursed objects comes down to apophenia, the brain's habit of finding patterns in random events, and the law of contagion, a deep human intuition that objects retain the essence of their previous owners.
The real mummy's curse. Zooming out from Tutankhamun, the truth about Egyptian curses is fascinating. Real inscribed curses did exist, just not the one everyone thinks of. Tomb robbery was a constant problem, so some tombs included written warnings. Pharaoh Pepi I's pyramid promised that violators would consume their own flesh. But these were spiritual deterrents, not magical traps. Ironically, Tutankhamun's tomb had no such inscription. The broader public fascination actually stemmed from Victorian mummy mania and 19th century fiction. However, there is a genuine hazard inside these tombs. A sealed tomb is a biological time capsule. Organic material can harbor dormant fungal spores, bacteria, and toxic residues like arsenic for millennia. Excavators taking that first breath of ancient air are facing a real danger. Not a curse, just highly concentrated, very old biology. 5. The Tomb of Qin Shi Huang. Unlike every other case on this list, this Chinese tomb is so dangerous that nobody has actually opened the main chamber. Emperor Qin Shi Huang was obsessed with immortality and, ironically, hastened his own death by consuming mercury pills. While his terracotta army was discovered in 1974, the central burial mound remains firmly sealed. Ancient historian Sima Qian wrote that the tomb contained miniature rivers of liquid mercury and mechanical crossbows rigged to fire at intruders. For centuries, this sounded like pure myth. But modern soil surveys have found mercury concentrations 20 to 50 times higher than natural background levels right above the mound. Between the lethal mercury vapor and the risk of instantly degrading ancient silk and pigments upon contact with air, archaeologists are leaving the door shut until preservation technology catches up.
6. The Iceman's Curse. In 1991, hikers in the Alps discovered Ötzi, a remarkably preserved 5,300-year-old mummy. What followed reads like a horror movie. Over the next few years, 7 people connected to the discovery died. Causes included a car accident, an avalanche, a brain tumor, and a climbing fall. Tabloids enthusiastically declared a curse. The headlines left out one crucial detail. Hundreds of scientists, guides, and museum staff have worked with Ötzi over the last 3 decades, and the overwhelming majority are alive and well. 7 deaths tied to plausible, mundane hazards is just statistical noise dressed up as a pattern. As for Ötzi himself, he wasn't cursed. X-rays revealed an arrowhead lodged in his shoulder. He was the victim of a 5,000-year-old homicide.
7. The Ghost City of the Andes.
For a long time, the sudden abandonment of Machu Picchu invited mystical explanations. How did a massive, remote Inca citadel become entirely forgotten until 1911? The real explanation is heavily documented: smallpox. The disease spread along Inca trade routes with terrifying speed, arriving years before the Spanish conquistadors ever physically did. The virus decimated the population, wiping out the labor force required to maintain the city's terraces and stonework. Combined with a brutal Inca civil war, the empire's infrastructure collapsed. Machu Picchu wasn't destroyed by an outside force or a mountain curse. It was rationally evacuated in the face of human catastrophe, then quietly reclaimed by the jungle.
8. The Easter Island ecocide myth. The standard story of Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, is a tidy morality tale. The islanders became so obsessed with carving their giant stone statues that they cut down every tree, triggered an ecological collapse, and destroyed their own civilization.
Modern science says otherwise. While deforestation happened, genetic and archaeological research shows no evidence of a population crash during that period. Instead, the islanders cleverly adapted using lithic mulching, scattering broken volcanic rock across fields to retain moisture and enrich the soil. The real collapse came much later, in the 1860s, when Peruvian slave raiders abducted roughly half the island's population. The few survivors who returned brought smallpox with them, nearly erasing a resilient culture that had survived just fine on its own.
9. The vanishing of the Indus Valley Civilization. Around 4,500 years ago, the Indus Valley Civilization featured urban planning and sanitation systems millennia ahead of their time. Then, the cities slowly emptied out. For decades, the leading theory blamed a violent invasion by Indo-Aryan conquerors, a narrative heavily influenced by colonial-era biases. Modern climate data and ancient DNA completely rewrite this story. The monsoon patterns shifted, and the critical river systems dried up. As the water vanished, the sophisticated cities could no longer be maintained. The population didn't die in a violent massacre. They underwent a gradual de-urbanization, migrating to smaller rural settlements over generations. The rivers simply stopped cooperating.
10. The Legend of Atlantis. Atlantis comes to us from the Greek philosopher Plato, who described a powerful maritime empire that angered the gods and sank in a single day. While treasure hunters have searched everywhere for a literal sunken city, historians view it as a philosophical parable. However, parables usually borrow from reality. Around 3,600 years ago, the Greek island of Santorini, then called Thera, experienced one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history. The blast buried the advanced Minoan settlement of Akrotiri under 60 meters of ash and triggered massive tsunamis that devastated their empire. If a folk memory of an advanced island civilization destroyed by the sea filtered down through 1,200 years of oral tradition, it would sound exactly like Plato's Atlantis.
The real curse. 10 cases, 10 different centuries, completely unconnected cultures, across 4 continents. And underneath every single one sits the exact same killer, wearing a different mask. Fungal spores in Egypt, superheated gas in Italy, brilliant marketing in Paris, liquid mercury in China, statistical noise in the Alps, smallpox in Peru, a drying river in South Asia, and a volcano in the Aegean.
Not one curse, not one act of supernatural vengeance. What actually connects all 10 stories is us. Specifically, the part of the human brain that evolved to spot patterns quickly. For most of our history, mistaking a shadow for a predator cost you nothing, but failing to notice a real predator cost you everything. That same wiring looks at a rich man's death 5 months after a tomb opening and sees a curse instead of a mosquito bite. Because a curse is a satisfying story, and satisfying stories are what survive. Lord Carnarvon did not die because he opened a door that was never meant to be opened. He died because he was frail, because a mosquito found him, and because that story was simply too good to let go of. The tombs, the diamonds, the sunken islands, none of them were ever really cursed. We just needed them to be.